how are you? Welcome back to the channel. So we have a new venture. It's a book about Alan Watts. Actually, it's a collection of essays that he wrote between 1960 and 1969. And it's since it is a collection of papers, it's about various topics, and we'll just cover one chapter a week, so that's one topic a week. And the first chapter is on Buddha and Buddhism. I want to say a couple of words about Alan Watts to start off with. I really appreciate his way of teaching, if you will, because he is able to put, complicated topics, mostly, the wisdom of Eastern traditions. He's able to put it so simply that, a Western audience is able to understand and to grasp it. And he also is quite entertaining, in his presentations, both in writing and also in his speaking engagements. He did a lot of lectures and they were recorded, so you can find recordings all over the internet. What I'll try and do is, whenever there's a recording, either of the very chapter that we're reading and or, recordings of topics that are sort of related, I will put them in the description box down below. So the videos that we're doing here serve to summarize what's said in each chapter. And it's going to be much easier this time around than with the last book that we did, The Ending of Time, because it's not a dialogue form. It's one voice. It's Alan Watts' voice, and so it's much easier to summarize into arguments and hypotheses and so on. And also, Alan Watts is a very sort of, or at least I think, a very structured thinker and speaker, so it's much easier to get a grasp of what he's talking about. So that said, let's start. So in this chapter, in this essay rather, Alan Watts tries to give an overview on what Buddha or Buddhism is, and he starts out asking this question by asking sort of the negative, So instead of asking what is Buddhism, he says we should start by asking what it is not. And that's really interesting, because Buddhism, as one would think, if one doesn't know anything about it, one would think it's a religion, but it's actually not. The term religion, Alan Watts reminds us, comes from the Latin root religere, which means to bind. And the whole purpose of Buddhism is to liberate. So if a religion is the following of a rule of life, it's the following of a rule of life that is believed to be divinely revealed, And normally a religion consists of three aspects or three things, and that's firstly creed, so a body of doctrine, then a code, so the expression of God in terms of a law, and a cult, the worship of God. And Buddhism has neither of those. It neither has a creed nor a code or a cult, strictly speaking. So Alan Watts then, asks what else could it be, what or how could we conceive of Buddhism? And one of the descriptions that we think would lend itself is, the description, it is a philosophy. But Alan Watts doesn't think so, because at least not, he doesn't think Buddhism is philosophy in terms of philosophy as we understand it in the West, which is concerned with the elaboration of ideas and theories about, the world, the universe, and so on. But in Alan Watts' mind, Buddhism is more like psychotherapy, and that might seem odd in the beginning, but he goes on and explains why he thinks it is. The object of a psychotherapist's practice is to change the person's state of consciousness, so the patient's state of consciousness, to change their state of mind, if you will. And if he says, if you stick to the analogy of psychotherapy, then the Buddha himself would have probably been the world's finest, first finest psychotherapist. And in that regard, we should probably clarify what Buddha refers to. Buddha, the term Buddha actually refers to an actual person who lived. It's the Gautama Siddhartha. He lived around 560 BC, and the word Buddha actually means the man who woke up, or the awakened one. And so if we regard this person that actually lived, a lot of time ago, a long time ago, as a therapist or psychotherapist, then one could think that his method is somewhat, it resembles the pattern of what a doctor would do, or a doctor's method. And one would assume that the doctor or the therapist would first assess, the suffering of a human being. He would diagnose it, he would identify the root cause, and then prescribe a remedy. And that's exactly what Buddhism does, what the method of Buddhism does. And it can be summarized in what's called the Four Noble Truths. It's sort of like the essence of the Buddhist teaching, if you want. And I'm going to show you a first table. So basically, when we stick with this metaphor of the psychotherapy, then in terms of the Buddha, the disease would refer to the Sanskrit dukkha, which means suffering or anguish. The cause of the disease would refer to the Sanskrit word Trishna, which means attachment. The cure of the disease would be called Nirvana, or the release. And the prescription, how to get to the cure would be Marga, which is the path. And you notice that we left out one of the terms, and that's the Avidya, which is sort of like in between dukkha and Trishna. And Avidya refers to unconsciousness or ignorance. Now, while it's sort of self-evident, that humans do suffer, that humans do live in anguish, it's less self-evident where, that comes from, and we should probably go through these different terms so to get to the root and then to the actual treatment of the disease, which is the suffering. So let's dive first into the term avidya. So avidya means unconsciousness or ignorance, and it has two aspects to it. The first one is the aspect of relative existence. So that means that everything that exists only in relation to other things and not in and of themselves. So if we think of the world as being made up of separate things rather than related things, we start to trying to deal with things as if they were separate, and that includes ourselves. So we can look at the first aspect of our ignorance thus is to think that we exist separately from everything else. The second aspect of ignorance is impermanence, and that's the recognition that everything is in flux all the time. So the world we live in doesn't consist so much of things or entities as it consists of process. And Buddhism suggests that out of these two main ignorances, the first being our feeling that we are separate, or we're sort of existing in ourselves, and the second one being that everything is in flux and everything is impermanent. If you're ignorant of that, of those two aspects, then you're prone to Trishna, which means attachment, which is essentially the cause of the disease, of the suffering. So by being ignorant of these aspects, you tend to, attach yourself to all kinds of things or notions, such as, I have an I have a self, that's a notion. You can attach yourself to objects, you can attach yourself to other people, and all because you feel that you're separate from them and that you're therefore suffering, So through our failure to see that everything is alive because it flows, we try to possess it, which is Trishna, or grasping, or attachment. I'm going to read you a just very short quote from Alan Watts himself. We think that underneath all form, all shape, all pattern, there is some solid stuff that we might call substance. And this is based on thinking that the world is made in the same way as potter makes pots out of clay. But really, this is an unnecessary notion, because the stuff underlying things, when we inquire into it in our own modern science, turns out to be ever more complex and subtle patterns. So he, of course, hints at science, and the propensity of science to want to take things apart and, go ever deeper and deeper and sort of compartmentalize even more and really get to the root of stuff, in that case of matter. And of course, what you find when you go to that level, when you go to that minute level, according to the latest science, you find either strings, like vibrating tiny strings, or you find wave functions. So there is no basic stuff. So it kind of gets validated by latest science. Now, if we go back to this allegory of, sickness or disease, and now that we've identified the cause for the disease, which is basically ignorance, and out of that ignorance comes the tendency to grasp, to want to hold on to, things. The cure is Nirvana, and that's to release. And Nirvana is not so much a place, such as Christians think of when they think of paradise. It's not somewhere you go, and it's not something you acquire, but rather it's, the realization that separateness is an illusion. So it's more like a movement of letting something go and releasing something. So it's more like a movement of releasing the illusion that there is separation between, between all there is, including you and I. So it's a letting go. It's the releasing of the idea of a concept. The concept is the separately existing self. So if you can release that fully, entirely, not just intellectually, but with your whole being, in terms of experiencing that as well, then you have Nirvana, then you are cured in the eyes of Buddhism. So here too, I'm going to read you a short quote from Alan Watts. We think of ourselves as doers behind thoughts and words and deed, as experiencers behind experience. But if we were to realize that we are, as it were, all action, all deed, the doer vanishes, and with it vanishes the sense of a man as something separate, something cut off, walled off from the rest of the world by his skin. If you have been practicing Buddhism, you will know the saying that there is no difference between the doer, the doing, and that which is being done. So it's another sort of way to help people conceive of, the aspect of, wholeness and togetherness and flow. So, of course, if there's a disease and if there's a cure, one should think there should be a prescription, and the prescription in Buddhist terms is Marga, which is the path. And what Alan Watts says in this very short essay about the path is that it's sort of like, it's to be regarded as the middle way, and it's the middle way between extremes. One extreme being asceticism or self-mortification, and the other extreme would be pleasure-seeking or hedonism. So that which lies in between those extremes is the middle way. And if we wanted to break it down even further for us lay people, it basically says, you could understand the middle way as living a balanced life. So if you were to formulate a sort of guideline for life out of that, you could simply say, get with it. And I find that really, liberating in itself when I read it. And that's typical Alan Watts, It's so easy, it's so simple, to just say, get with it, meaning you should plunge into what is in the moment, whether it's good or bad at the time. You should just get with it. You should flow with it. So what that means is it basically means acceptance, accepting of what is going on anyway, instead of fighting it or resisting it. And I'm going to read you a last quote from Alan Watts with regards to the path. And that is, so the ultimate experience of Buddhism is that when we come together with ourselves again, as a result of coming together with ourselves, we find that we are together with everything. We are not separate, cut off beings, but that this whole universe is ourself. That's it. That was chapter 1. As I said, I hope I could give you sort of like a glimpse of what has been said in this chapter. If you wish to know more, please check out the description box. There's all kinds of links to audio files that you could just listen to when you take a long walk. Alan Watts is really nice to listen to when you're walking. So I wish you a good time, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.